In this video, we will look at configuration of the generic remote device in Cubase or Nuendo. When you use Cubase and Nuendo plugins in Stream Deck, the only thing you configure on Stream Deck is which command a button will trigger, and everything else is configured in the generic remote configuration in your DAW. If you want to change or add anything, it's important to understand how things work. So let's have a look at the generic remote configuration in Cubase. It's the same in Nuendo. The upper half of this window is configuration of how a command should behave on the Midi connection. And the lower half is how that command will behave within your DAW. So if we add a command definition, we have a number of attributes for the Midi channel. We have the Midi status, which is not actually status. I don't know why they call it a status. It's what kind of command it is. And the only type that is implemented in the Cubase and Nuendo plugins is the control change. So this has to be controller. You have the Midi channel and you have what they call address, which is in fact the control change number, and the max value and some flags. And why I will get back to the flags later. This has to have a name. So let's say that we want to add a play button. In the lower half, you will find the same name. They will replicate the name. So I don't really know the link between the upper and lower half, if it's the position or if it's the control name, but there is a link between those two. So the first line in the upper section corresponds to the first line in the lower section. So here we have defined that we have a command that will react on control change 0 on Midi channel 1. And that command, let's say that we want to trigger the start function in the transport. So there you have a complete configuration of a remote command. What we need to do, and what is most important for the plugin, is the flags column in the upper and lower section. In the upper section, at least we should have receive and we should have transmit, so that Cubase will receive and transmit that value. Otherwise, we don't have a communication with Stream Deck. In some cases, you may add one of the other, but I come back to that. But receive and transmit, you should always have. In the lower section, you define how the button will work, if it will be a push button or a toggle button or a hold button or anything else. And I will come back and explain the different settings here. But for a play button, let's say that that is a push button. This is everything we need to define to have a play button in Stream Deck. If we look at a button in Stream Deck, we still don't have any commands available, and that is because this configuration is not changed until you close this window. I don't know what the apply button does, but it doesn't change, it doesn't save the configuration to the file. So you need to close that window. Then you have the play button available in Stream Deck. So now if I use the play button, Cubase start to play. Another thing that is important to know is that now we have a link between the play button in Stream Deck and the play function in generic remote. And the link between Stream Deck and generic remote is the control name. You can change anything of all the other parameters, and the Stream Deck button will adapt automatically. So if we change, say for instance that we want to use Midi channel 3 and save that, the button will still work when we use it. So the button will automatically adapt immediately when you make changes in the generic remote setup, unless you make a change of the name. Let's say we change name to player and save. Now we have broken the link between the Stream Deck button and the configuration in your DAW. It's no problem, we can just select the new name and everything's back to normal, but you need to be aware that the name is the link. Okay, so let's add another function. And if you press add, we will get an exact copy of the selected row in the upper section. And it's important to know here that you must change the address or the Midi channel, but the Midi channel and address combination must be unique. Otherwise you will have two commands that react on the same button, and then I don't think that's a good idea. And you also need to change the name, otherwise you will have duplicate names in the Stream Deck drop-down. So let's say we want to add a cycle functionality. Then we need to link this command to the cycle function. And this time we need to say that it is a toggle functionality. So when we press the button, it will turn the cycle mode on, and when we press it again, it will turn it off. So it will toggle the cycle state. So if we save that and connect that cycle function to a button. So if I now press that button, I will activate the cycle mode in your DAW, and if I press it again, I will deactivate. In this case, I recommend that you add the relative mode or the relative flag for any command that has only the T flag in the lower section. That is a toggle command. I really don't know why, because in the Cubase documentation, the relative flag is used for rotary controllers. But I have found that if you have a toggle button, there are situations where the button and Cubase or Nuendo will get out of sync. So the state in your DAW is different from the state in Stream Deck. But if that relative flag is set, it doesn't happen. I don't know why, but I recommend that you set relative flag for things that have only the T flag in the bottom. Okay, let's add another function. And we change address and say that we will have a forward button. That is something that should work as long as we keep the button pressed. So it's another kind of function. So it's the transport and we want forward. And in this case, we need to select both push button and toggle button. And that will tell Cubase and Nuendo and Stream Deck that this function will be executed as long as we have the button pressed. So if we press OK, and we have another button that we can connect to forward. And now if I use that button, nothing happens. And the reason that nothing happens is this relative flag. It must not be set in this situation. So if we remove that flag and say OK and try again, we will have forward movement as long as I keep the button pressed. So there you can see that the configuration of these flags is very important. If you get a situation where things doesn't work as you expect them to work, try to change some flags and see if you can get things to work better. Now let's add another one, and let's say we want to add a function, say go to marker 1. We need a unique address, and we want to have transport, and we want to go to marker button 1. This is a function similar to the play function, where you press the button and something happens and that's it. So you could expect that you should configure it as a push button. And if we do that and connect a Stream Deck button to that go to marker function, we will see that when we use the button, we will go to marker 1, so it works. But if we look at the marker section in your DAW, marker 1 is selected. And even if we select to go to marker 2, marker 1 is still selected. And that's kind of odd. And I think that this is changed if we say that this is in fact a hold button. That is, the function will be active as long as we keep the button pressed. So if we change to a hold button, we can see that when I press the button, we go to marker 1. Marker 1 will be selected in your DAW, but when I release the button, the selection is gone. So that is my recommendation. And again, if you find something that doesn't work as you expect it to work, try to change those flags a bit and see if you can find a better way to have it configured. Let's add one more thing. I want to show you how you can configure key commands to be triggered through Midi. So let's say we want to open Mixer 3 using Midi instead of the key command. We need, as usual, a unique address for that one. And if we close that for a bit and just look at the key commands, and we see that the Mix Console 3 doesn't have any key command assigned to it. And in this case, it actually doesn't need to. If we open the Studio Setup again, we can say here that we want to trigger a command. We want to trigger it from the device category, and we want to trigger Mixer 3. We don't have any choice for the flags in this case. Steinberg has defined that commands are push commands. We can't do anything about that. So now we have a definition that the key command for opening Mixer 3 will be triggered by this Midi command without having an actual key command assigned to that function. So let's assign that function to a button in Stream Deck, and when I press that button, we will open Mixer 3 and close it. So in some cases, it's good to have these functions through Midi instead of through key commands, because key commands require that Cubase has focus on the screen. When you use Midi, it doesn't need to. It's a bit more job to configure, but in some cases it's a good thing. The final thing I want to show you is how to control mixers. You can't do that with the Cubase or Nuendo plugins, but you can do it with the control change function in the Midi plugin. So if we look at the Studio configuration again and add a new function and say, for instance, master volume, and add a unique address to it. And we connect that to the mixer and to the stereo out and volume. This is again a situation where I should think it's logical to use the P and T flags and say that this is a hold button. We want the fader, the master volume fader, to move as long as we keep the button pressed. But by some reason, we need to leave it like this. I don't know why, but Steinberg has decided that this is the way it should be. So now we have a configuration where we can control the master fader volume. So if we look at how to configure the control change actions in Stream Deck, we need to select a command, and the command we should select is the address we have set in the generic remote configuration. So 5 in this case, we should select 5. Whatever the text in Stream Deck says, it's 5 that we should select. And we do the same for that button. And that is basically what we need to do. Before doing anything else, if we look at the state now, the Stream Deck button shows the fader as being in the bottom, while if we look at the stereo out fader, it's definitely not at the same position. And as soon as we start to move the fader, as soon as we press a button, something will happen. The Cubase or Nuendo and Stream Deck will synchronize, and there are two different ways of how they synchronize, and you can select the way you want to use yourself. If we look at the flags for the master volume controller, there is a pickup value. If that is not selected, what will happen as soon as I press a button on Stream Deck, the fader in Cubase or in Nuendo will immediately jump to the same position as in Stream Deck. If I select pickup like that, what will happen is, in this case, I can show it. When I press the up button, the fader in Stream Deck will start to move, but the fader in the DAW will not do anything until Stream Deck reaches the same level, and from that point on they will be synchronized. One thing to be aware of if you use the control change action to control volume in this way is this. We have said that the master volume should be connected to stereo out, but in fact, behind the scenes, it is not connected to stereo out. It is connected to the fourth lane in the mixer. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Anything that is in this position will be controlled by that Stream Deck button. So if we add an audio track, or whatever track we need, we have another track in this position. And if I now use the Stream Deck buttons, I will control that fader. And if we look at the studio setup, it will now say Audio 03. So just be aware that it will change if you insert tracks in your project. One final thing to say about the generic remote setup is don't use the learn functionality. It doesn't work because you have to set a command on the Stream Deck button before it starts to communicate, so you can't learn anything in the generic remote that it doesn't already know. So it simply doesn't work, so don't try to use it. I hope that you found some useful information in this video. Thanks for watching.